Hello and welcome. You're watching our afternoon edition of Arirang News. I'm Kwon Jang-ho and thank you for joining us. On today's show, we discuss the reports that say the US has given a denuclearization timeline to North Korea multiple times, but that so far it has been refused. We also talk about whether the US National Security Advisor John Bolton is just playing bad cop with his skeptical comments on North Korea. We'll get to all that later, but first we turn to our news centre where Devin Whiting updates us on the latest headlines. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. There have been reports that South Korea has failed to stop North Korean coal from being shipped into the country. But on Wednesday, the U.S. reaffirmed its trust in South Korea. The State Department told Yonhap News that it considers the government in Seoul a reliable partner in the enforcement of UN Security Council resolutions, which it's required to do by inspecting ships that are under suspicion. The State Department says Washington and Seoul are working closely together, and it's aware that South Korea has opened an investigation into the coal import claims. UN sanctions banned the North from selling mineral resources, but one of several incidents occurred just last weekend when a ship docked in South Korea after stopping at a Russian port with black material believed to be coal from the North. North Korea's top diplomat RiYong-ho held talks with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani in Tehran on Wednesday as the two countries look to bolster their already strong bilateral relations. According to an Iranian news outlet, the North Korean foreign minister briefed Rouhani on the ongoing nuclear negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington. The meeting came just a day after the Trump administration reintroduced sanctions on Iran, a result of President Trump's decision to withdraw from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he's willing to visit North Korea if there's a chance that would help with denuclearization. Speaking to Japanese broadcaster NHK in Tokyo on Wednesday, the UN chief said he would visit the North if the ongoing negotiations stall, adding that a possible visit will depend on circumstances that make the visit useful. Guterres is currently in Japan to attend the annual memorial ceremony for the victims of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki in 1945. It's the second salvo in a 24-hour period in the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China. Wasting little time to respond to Washington's new tariffs on Chinese goods, Beijing is also slapping an additional tariff of 25% on $16 billion worth of American imports. Lee Seung-jae reports.
From fuel and steel products to automobiles and medical equipment, China is slapping additional tariffs of 25% on $16 billion worth of U.S. imports as the world's two largest economies take their trade war to the next level. China's Commerce Ministry said Wednesday that the tariffs will be activated on August 23rd, the same day that the U.S. plans to begin collecting an extra 25% in tariffs on $16 billion of Chinese goods. While the U.S. published its final list of goods subject to the new tariffs on Tuesday, China's final list, revealed on Wednesday, differs from an earlier draft announced back in June. The number of categories of goods subject to the tariffs has risen to 333 from 114, but the total value remains unchanged. The list of goods subject to the tariffs include energy products like coal, as well as large items like cars, but crude oil has been excluded from the list. China's latest tariff measures are in response to the earlier U.S. action. U.S. President Donald Trump is determined to put pressure on China to negotiate trade concessions, with Washington imposing tariffs on $34 billion in Chinese goods last month alone. So far, China has now either imposed or proposed tariffs on $110 billion of U.S. goods. The blowback from the trade war is becoming apparent in the American job market, with a U.S.-based television factory planning to shed staff. Element Electronics, a TV manufacturing plant in South Carolina, will lay off at least 126 employees from its Winsboro plant on October 5th. This comes as the Trump administration imposed a 25% import tax in July, which affects Chinese components for TVs and video equipment. Observers remain concerned as the latest measures by China may trigger President Trump's next round of threatened tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's transport ministry is looking at banning tens of thousands of late-model BMWs from the road until they've been put through examinations. Dozens of the German cars have caught fire in Korea because of a faulty engine part. In the meantime, consumers are taking legal action. Our RiYong-ho tells us more.
On Wednesday, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport said it is considering banning BMWs from the road to prevent any more fires. The ministry said the ban will apply to cars that have not passed a safety examination. BMW Korea is supervising the safety examinations, which are focused on the faulty engine part known as EGR or exhaust gas recirculation, believed to be the cause of recent BMW engine fires. Out of 100,000 vehicles subject to recall, only about 47,000 have gone through the examinations as of Tuesday. On Thursday, a group of BMW owners in South Korea filed a police complaint seeking a criminal investigation into BMW officials like Vice President Johan Evan Bickler in charge of quality control at BMW Group and Kim Yo-jun, the chief of the South Korea unit. Baden Law Firm says it lodged a complaint on behalf of 20 BMW owners and one victim of a BMW vehicle-related fire. In the petition, the owners claim BMW was aware of the extent of the problem with the part after an engine fire in Europe in 2016, but has only recently concluded that the EGR is the source of engine fire. The lawyer representing the owners said that the authorities should initiate a probe into BMW headquarters in BMW Korea to prevent any evidence from being destroyed. On Wednesday local time, a German newspaper reported that a faulty EGR module in some BMW diesel cars, which caused engine fires in South Korea, prompted a massive recall of 324,000 units in Europe. So far this year, 36 engine fires have happened in Korea. 최시영, Arirang News.
South Korea's central bank has released its data on financial market trends for July. It shows the ongoing trade war between the world's two economic superpowers affected the local markets again. Kim Hae-sung has the details.
The Bank of Korea says the country's three-year Treasury yields moved lower on heightened external uncertainties stemming from the escalating U.S.-China trade spat. Yields fell 0.08% from 2.2% between end of May to the end of June, remained at 2.1% through the end of July, then fell slightly to 2.07% as of Wednesday. The central bank attributed the smaller fall in three-year Treasury bond yields to expectations of a possible rate hike in July, which would have lifted the bond yield. The Bank of Korea, however, stood pat on its key rate, leaving it at 1.5%. The 10-year bond yield remains unchanged from end of June at 2.56% as of Wednesday. Bank lending to Korean households saw a slower pace of growth in July than the previous month on fewer housing transactions. Lending to the corporate sector jumped by nearly $5.2 billion in July on increased demand for loans from small and mid-sized companies who needed to pay their value-added tax bills. As a whole, deposit taking by banks decreased in July to a negative $7.7 billion as firms withdrew funds to pay their first half value-added tax by the July deadline. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
For weeks, the Trump administration has been saying that there is no timeline related to the North Korean denuclearization process. But it seems that might not have been entirely true. According to the latest reports, the US has reportedly asked North Korea to hand over more than 60% of its nuclear weapons within a few months. Pyongyang has not been responding positively to these demands, and negotiations seem to be at a worrying standstill. We'll discuss this further with an expert in the studio right after this report by Arirang's Foreign Ministry correspondent, Lee Ji-won.
It's being reported the United States has presented a denuclearization timeline to North Korea, but the regime has refused to accept it. Multiple U.S. media outlets, including Vox, reported Wednesday that U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo requested Pyongyang to hand over 60 to 70% of its nuclear warheads within 6 to 8 months, which Washington or a third party would take possession of. But it's unclear what the U.S. offered in exchange, if anything. Citing two people familiar with the discussions, Vox added that Pompeo has presented the timeline to North Korea numerous times within the past 2 months. But it was rebuffed each time by the North Koreans, led by Kim Yong-chol, Pyongyang's vice chairman of the ruling Workers' Party Central Committee. According to the Washington Post, U.S. intelligence agencies estimate the North has as many as 60 nuclear warheads, but the exact number is not known. Therefore, even if the regime does agree to hand over more than half of its nuclear warheads, it would be difficult to verify that was actually the case. A source told Vox this is why Pompeo's main goal at the current stage of negotiations is to get North Korea to officially disclose how many nuclear weapons it possesses. As the talks have not made much progress, Washington could be losing patience. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, told reporters traveling with her during a visit to Colombia that everything is currently in North Korea's court. She went on to say the international community still expects Pyongyang to keep its promise to denuclearize, and the U.S. is willing to wait if the international community wants to. But she warned the U.S. is not going to wait for too long. The negotiations are proving tricky as North Korea is sticking to its guns on the U.S. fulfilling its side of the bargain. North Korea's state-run newspaper Nodong Sinmun published an editorial on Thursday urging Washington to declare an end to the Korean War. It said ending the war is the first step to securing peace in the region and around the world, adding it will set a positive atmosphere and build confidence between Pyongyang and Washington. 이지원, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, to discuss these latest developments, we have with us Dr. Woo Jung-yup from the Sejong Institute with us. Thank you for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Now, for a long time, President Trump, Pompeo and other Washington officials have said that there was no denuclearization timeline for North Korea. But now it seems that that might not have been the case. It's perhaps not entirely surprising, as we would have expected them to have made some demands. But still, what do you make of these latest developments?
It is very difficult to verify whether the contents of the report today is true or not, because neither side has not confirmed the contents of the report today. But I know that there were some discussions in the same kind within the U.S. government before the meeting with the North Koreans began in June. So I think that it was kind of U.S. plan to negotiate with with North Korea. That North Korea has to reveal their stockpiles, and also U.S. wants to take away the existing warheads out of North Korean territory. But recently, the United States requested North Korea to submit the list of nuclear programs, nuclear stockpiles. So that is the first thing that U.S. demand North Korea to do. So I think that it's the combination of facts that U.S. has been thinking of in the first place, and it also includes the fact that what Secretary Pompeo demands during his recent visit to Pyongyang. So we have to see whether that report can be verified by the U.S. government or not.
Of course, so you say the report can't be verified of yet, but if we do maybe look at some of the suggestions that it does make, it says they asked 60 to 70% of North Korea's nuclear weapons be handed over within 6 to 8 months. Is that even logistically possible?
There was that kind of discussions before the serious negotiation began between two countries, and the biggest difference between the current negotiation between U.S. and North Korea and the previous negotiation between two countries is how to deal with the existing nuclear warheads. Because the past negotiations solely discussed on the future nuclear programs of North Korea, such as freezing or not more producing any more nuclear materials or fissile materials. But this time, the U.S. is more focusing on how to deal with the existing nuclear weapons. That is why this kind of discussions like taking out nuclear warheads from North Korean territory was discussed. So there was a discussion that U.S. can take those warheads out of North Korean territory by themselves, or they can ask international organization to do it, or they can ask Russia or China to do it. So they say that it's logistically possible if North Korea agrees to do it. But I think it's a very long way because United States and North Korea has not even started the formal negotiation of denuclearization of North Korea yet.
On North Korea's side, they'll be saying that we've already started some of our promises to you. They've said we're going to dismantle some of its nuclear facilities, and satellite photos have shown that they have taken some steps. At the same time, a UN report came out the other day saying that the North Korean nuclear program is still up and running, and in fact, it's been funded by illegal shipping at sea. What do you make of these two different reports? And should we see North Korea's actions dismantling one site, but at the same time carrying on their nuclear development?
So it's really possible that both things can happen simultaneously, because as Chairman Kim Jong-un's New Year's message on January 2nd this year, that their goal with regard to their nuclear program is to mass produce their nuclear weapons and also the combat-ready deployment. That means that they already achieved the technological development they want. That means that they really don't need to have tests anymore. That means that they don't need any other sites that's related to the testing the missile engines or even the nuclear warhead. So they can remove their missile engine site and nuclear site, but at the same time that they can increase their nuclear capacity, including mass production and the combat-ready deployment.
Of course, when North Korea says they're dismantling their nuclear weapons, John Bolton, the US National Security Advisor in the US, he's saying that North Korea aren't doing anywhere near enough. And he's emerged recently in a lot of TV interviews. He was, of course, put to the side at one point because he was the reason why they said they were going to delay the US and North Korea talks. But now he's emerging and he's coming out fighting. What do you make of the fact that he's making all these kind of strong comments?
I'm not sure whether this is kind of a choreographed move by the US government, but I think that his comment on TV is based on the frustration that US government has with regard to the negotiation with North Korea. Because North Korea has not designated who will be the counterpart to the Secretary Pompeo with regard to the negotiation with the denuclearization process of North Korea. So we don't know who's going to be the counterpart for the Ambassador Sung Kim for the United States with regard to this matter. So technically, North Korea and the United States have not started their formal negotiation about the denuclearization yet. So the United States has requested North Korea to designate who would be the Secretary Pompeo's counterpart. That means that North Korea acknowledged that the formal negotiation will begin. And at the same time, U.S. demands North Korea to submit the list of their nuclear programs. But apparently, North Korea has not responded positively to that demands. So from the U.S. perspective, that North Korea has not shown any progress in whatever U.S. demands North Korea to do. So dismantling the missile engine testing site is not much to the United States. It's better than doing nothing. But for the United States, it does not show any sincere intention of North Korea's denuclearization process.
John Bolton and the US and other officials have stressed that they're going to keep sanctions on North Korea until they show more progress on denuclearization. But then at the same time, it's emerged a few days ago that the UN Security Council have greenlit the new guidelines for allowing humanitarian aid into North Korea, and the fact that it was proposed by the US in the first place. So what do we make of these two kind of differing actions? On one side, they're saying full sanctions. On the other side, they're saying, actually, we're going to allow some humanitarian aid.
Even before, actually, I have to correct the fact that the humanitarian aid has been allowed within, even under the sanction regimes by the United Nations and also the U.S. unilateral sanctions. But the problem that the UN Security Council wanted to correct this time is that because of the sanctions, that necessary humanitarian aid has been blocked, because many entities that are dealing with the humanitarian aid are not sure about their actions, whether they are violating the sanctions or not. So many humanitarian aid has been delayed unnecessarily. So the U.S. proposes this idea that all the entities with regard to the humanitarian aid to North Korea, they have to declare that what kind of items that are going to be delivered and what kind of actions to be involved and who are going to be there and what kind of audit program is going to be. Then they can expedite the process of delivering humanitarian aid to North Korea, because there was a concern that like TB, medicines, and other very necessary food and medicines are not delivered on time. So this is not new, but the U.S. and the UN Security Council want to expedite the process of humanitarian aid, but as long as it does not hurt the purpose of the sanctions onto North Korea.
North Korea have replied on their own state media to these kinds of stories and demands, and they're saying that the U.S. needs to lift sanctions, otherwise, they're not going to improve relations, and the fact that the U.S. needs to also formally declare the end of the Korean War. Only then can they have better relations and better progress. But what do you think? But obviously, for the U.S., they're asking for denuclearization first. Can these two sides be reconciled at any point?
So we have to point out that North Korea's demand of the declaration of end to war is not related to denuclearization negotiation. So there has been some reports in Korea and the international media that if end of war declaration was given to North Korea, then North Korea is going to denuclearize. But there was no such discussions between the United States and North Korea. North Korea demands declaration of the end to war to the United States, but North Korea did not say that if declaration of end to war was given, then they are going to denuclearize. So it's two different things for now. So United States would not give declaration of the end to war to as North Korea wanted, and North Korea insists to have the declaration of end to war first. So at this stage, two countries insist on their initial position. So we have to see how the negotiation is going to reconcile those two different views from now on.
Despite negotiations seeming to stall between the US and North Korea right now, there are also reports that, John Bolton, he revealed that in the letter that was given to Foreign Minister RiYong-ho at the ASEAN Forum a few days ago, that Trump offered Pompeo to go back to North Korea for further negotiations, and they even suggested that they meet again at some point. So we're guessing negotiations are still ongoing and there is still hope?
I think that President Trump and Secretary Pompeo, who are mainly engaged with the negotiation with North Korea, they have not said any negative things toward North Korea, because if President Trump or Secretary Pompeo started to mention negative things toward North Korea, that means that it's going to be very difficult for two countries to lead future negotiations. So I think that it's a very good gesture from the United States to continue the negotiation and the engagement with North Korea. But it does not mean that the United States is changing its policy toward North Korea when it comes to the sanctions or declaration of end to war or denuclearization process of North Korea. So this is a formal letter that shows the good gesture and goodwill from the United States, but it does not mean that it reflects any change in the U.S. government policy toward North Korea with regard to the denuclearization.
And very briefly, before we go, there are rumors that Kim Jong-un could come to New York in September to attend the UN General Assembly. Now, progress, because of the negotiations they've stalled, that seems less likely now, but do you think it's still possible?
I think that because of the current relations with Iran and the U.S. government, and the EU and China are actually opposing the U.S. Withdrawal of the JCPOA, which is not good for the U.S. Reputation in the world politics. So I think that there's there's an incentive for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to take advantage of that kind of moment. So if he wants that, he wants to take advantage of the UN General Assembly in September to make his argument against President Trump and the United States.
Interesting. So we'll keep an eye on that in next month. Thank you for coming in, Professor, and sharing us your thoughts as always.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of today's show. I'll be back same time tomorrow and hope you can join us again then. Thank you for watching and goodbye for now.